Welcome, everybody, to an all-new episode of Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. I appreciate you taking time out to join me as I take my weekly look at everything going on in the world of combat sports. There certainly was a lot. We had two fight cards last weekend. We got one we have to check out this weekend. We have a lot of big news in boxing as well. All that going on the show today. We're going to start by recapping UFC 322, of course, the big show at the Garden, where you had two titles on the line, both of those involving current champions facing former champions. There was a lot going on there. We'll also preview the UFC Fight Night over in the Middle East going on this weekend. We'll then recap BKFC 84 out there in the desert in Cali. You had a title on the line in that one as well, where an old champ becomes the new champ in that one. Then we'll also talk about some things going on in boxing, including the big fight last weekend between Benn-Eubank Jr. We will preview the fights we have coming up this weekend on the DAZN pay-per-view, at least the top two ones on that card with some titles on the line. And we'll talk about big news involving Jake Paul. He has a new opponent and a possible end date for his career in boxing, as well as talking about how Wardley, no longer the interim champ in boxing, and we'll also hit announcements from the PFL involving next year's schedule, 2026. All that coming up on today's episode of Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. Make sure you follow us and check us out on all social medias and platforms. We are on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Like, subscribe, comment, help us get into the algorithms, help us find more people to reach, get them involved in the show as much as you do. Also, you can check things out on social media throughout the week. On X, we are at Fighting Lines at Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. We are at Fighting Lines Pod. We'll drop clips throughout the week. We'll drop opinions. We'll drop picks, all those different things on our social medias as much as we can give to you for the show. But let's get right into the action. We have a lot to talk about, and we'll kick things off. We're going to the Garden in UFC 322. All right, well, last week, the UFC made their yearly journey to the Big Apple, hanging out at Madison Square Garden, UFC 322. It was a stacked card we talked about from top to bottom, lots of great action. Two titles were on the line, for current or former champions in the mix in those just top two fights. And the letter of the day was D for domination and drops. Let's start with the domination aspect of it. The two main and co-main event fights, two titles that were on the line. Welterweight title was the headliner in this one, of course, between Jack Della Maddalena and Islam Makhachev. JDM, of course, the 29-year-old from Australia, currently held this title after winning all 8 fights in the UFC for him and getting a decision win in May over Bilal Muhammad to take this strap, defending it for the first time against Islam Makhachev, the former lightweight champion who vacated that belt to move up after defending it 4 times, decided to take on a new challenge, hadn't lost in 10 years, was on a 15-fight win streak. We thought it was all going to be about who controlled the action. JDM wants to keep it on the feet, wants to strike. Islam Makhachev wants to take you down and smother you, and he is the one who dominates this fight and becomes the new welterweight champion. We had him at minus 290. That was the money line spread for him. Of course, that was pricey. We didn't love that, so, if you use it in other ways like a parlay, which I'll hit on later on. But if you wanted to find some value, you had to find different ways to bet it. We liked by KO, TKO, or submission, the double play at plus 120 or going under 3.5 at minus 104. Unfortunately, neither of those hit. As we go the distance, he gets the unanimous decision win, 50-45 on all 3 judges' scorecards. Now, there was a second we were worried about this fight and about this pick because even though he looked great in pictures you saw before the fight, Makhachev moving up in weight to 170, when they hit the scales, it looked different. He looked kind of emaciated. It looked a little bit like he had been drained from losing weight, which wouldn't make sense when you're moving up in weight, but still, we had made the pick. We stuck with the pick. We stuck with our gut, and it paid off because Makhachev absolutely dominated the whole fight against JDM to become the champion. Almost 4 full rounds of control for Makhachev on the ground, 19 minutes and 10 seconds in total. And that was with only 4 takedowns throughout the fight. This wasn't a situation like you had in other fights where guys getting tossed around for 15, 30 takedowns. This was 4 takedowns. There was one round he didn't even take him down, still dominated him. Now, of course, was round 2 where he didn't take JDM to the mat, and still outstruck him 36-6. So we thought JDM would hold advantage on the feet. Makhachev even beat him there. There was actually one point in the corner that he was telling his corner, like, I think I can strike to this guy, and then don't be stupid. Take him down, beat him up. So that's what he did. And you can just see that JDM was frustrated and shot by the time they got to the championship rounds. Honestly, I'm surprised we made it all 5. I'm surprised we didn't hit that under 3.5. I thought that maybe the way JDM looked going into his corner before we hit the championship rounds, that he could have finished him. I mean, he only threw 1 strike in both those rounds. But still, he ends up going the distance, Makhachev gets a unanimous decision win, though, and ties Anderson Silva with his 16th straight UFC win and is now number 1 in the pound-for-pound rankings. I mean, this guy is creeping up, if not surpassing, his mentor Khabib Nurmagomedov's legacy right now. He might be the best fighter coming out of that camp because it is just amazing what he has done. Khabib, of course, would have been better with his legacy if he didn't stop when he did. Kind of pulled a Megatron there, Barry Sanders, where quit still in his prime, but obviously with everything that happened with his father, his passing, and deciding to live up to the promise to his mom to stop this and just fall back and become the trainer and mentor that he has for the rest of his family and cousins and team. He would have done even greater things with Makhachev now. Not only dominated that lightweight division like Khabib did, but now has moved up and started a reign at 170 now. We'll see what he does next. He said after the fight that Kamaru Usman should be the next one to challenge him in his first title defense. That's insane. Stylistically in his prime, yeah, Usman might be a good matchup for him. It'd be a great fight. It'd be very interesting. But Usman has only fought 4 times in the last 4 years and lost 3 of those 4 fights before he beat Joaquin Buckley in June. That's not enough to get you back in the title picture. He's number 8 right now in the rankings. There's no way, to me, that Kamaru Usman should be the next one in line. In fact, could be one of the guys that put up big wins further down on this card last weekend, or it could be a fight between this weekend. We got Bilal Muhammad versus Ian Machado Gary. We'll talk about that one later, who we think is going to win. That one can determine who gets the next title shot as well. Of course, Muhammad, the former champion. IMG, of course, the former top challenger in that division before he got his first loss. So if one of those guys wins in a spectacular fashion, they could clearly be the one who's next in line and the first title defense for Makhachev. We'll see how that one goes. If not, it could be one of those guys who had an impressive win earlier on the card last weekend. Then the co-main event for this card was the women's flyweight title between Valentina Shevchenko and Zhang Weili. Of course, the Bullet Shevchenko defending her title. The 37-year-old Russian flyweight champion had defended it 8 times. Her last fight before this title defense was a win over Manon Fiorot by decision in May, going against Weili, the 36-year-old from China, who was the 115-pound champ. Strawweight champ gave it up, decided to move up, just like Makhachev did, decided to take on a new challenge, wanted to find a bigger bully. Well, she was on a 5-fight win streak. That ended. Shevchenko was the favorite at -128. We liked her. We said you didn't even need to play it another way if you wanted to, because the odds were good. But we said go the distance, because both of these women go to decisions a lot. Well, the yes was -186 to go the distance. Not great. Over 4.5 rounds, -210. Definitely stay away from that. And by points, -195. So none of those were juicy. So we said Shevchenko by points, +175 when we were recording earlier in the week. Now that even got down to +135 because I guess a bunch of people bet on it. That's how it goes. Shevchenko wins by unanimous decision, 50-45 on all 3 judges' scorecards. We talked about how Makhachev dominated JDM. Honestly, this domination was even worse. I mean, Dana White summed it up when he talked after the fight saying, this is why you have weight divisions. Shevchenko just looked too big for her, dominated her throughout the fight. Again, a lot of takedowns and control, 5 of 6 on takedowns, 13 minutes and 24 seconds of control time. That's over half the fight that she was just dominating the former champion. It wasn't even a great fight to watch. It was one of those you get a lot of fans in the crowd starting to boo because it's just ugly, it's boring. But you know what? It was a great fight for Shevchenko. It was smart. It's often the way she wins, and now she continues to do that. After the fight, she talked about maybe fighting Kayla Harrison or a third fight with Nunes. Now, Nunes talked after the fight by Shevchenko saying that she's going to come back, beat Harrison, then go down to 125 and take that belt from Shevchenko instead of meeting her at 135 like they had before. But, I mean, we've already seen the Nunes fight twice, and Nunes won. And do you really think at her age that she should get down to 125, cut that much weight, and try to take that belt? I don't know what kind of shape she's going to be in at that point. Honestly, maybe if Harrison beats Nunes and Shevchenko wants to try to take her on, go for it. But otherwise, I think she just should defend that belt. There are up-and-coming challenges. Of course, Fiorot was the one who was right there at the top of those rankings. You're going to skip her even though she just got a nice win because she just lost to Shevchenko, a couple months ago. So if you look down those rankings, Natalia Silva has a good case to get the next title shot. She's number 2 in the rankings, won all 7 of her UFC fights, and all 7 fights in just 3.5 years. So she's active, she's winning, and she's looked good. Give her a title shot against Shevchenko. Also, yet another winner from earlier in the card lurking there at number 4 in that division. So there are a couple women in the mix there to fight Shevchenko if she decides to continue. Obviously, at 37, who knows how much longer she's going to be in this game. But she stays down to 125 and defends, there's some good ones in the mix still to fight her that haven't had that shot yet that I think would make a little bit more interesting fight than her going against Nunes or Harrison at 135 or higher. Then at welterweight, before that fight, you had number 2, Sean Brady versus Michael Morales. This is one of those fights at welterweight that we said could be big as far as the future of that division after Makhachev takes that belt. Brady, the 32-year-old from Philly, was coming in on a 3-fight win streak over Gastelum, Burns, and Leon Edwards. So he beat some big names in the division, most of those by submission and decision. Going against Morales, a 28-year-old from Ecuador, who's becoming a star in this, unbeaten. 6-0 in the UFC, 18-0 overall coming into this fight. 13 of those wins by knockout, including his last 2. So you have the guy who likes to smother you and take you to the ground versus the guy who likes to take your head off. Who was going to be the one to get their way in this one? We thought it'd be Morales, plus 116 on the money line. He's going to have a big reach advantage. Now, of course, Brady was a guy who probably would have had the title shot if Makhachev hadn't moved up to 170, but he did, so he gets put on the back burner a little bit, has to fight this up-and-comer, and it bites him in the ass. Gets dropped in that fight. Round 1, 3 minutes and 27 seconds into the fight, Morales gets the KO TKO win to hit the plus 320 on KO TKO victory by Morales that we gave you earlier in the week. This was another one that was just domination. Morales outstruck him 24-8, and all those shots were to the head. Morales was swarming him with big shots at the end, and Brady's moving, trying to get out of the way, trying to survive, duck a little bit, and then Morales catches him with a right uppercut that starts to fall, hits him again with a left uppercut as he's going down, and then jumps on top and lands a few big hammer fists before the ref stops it. It was just a great performance by Morales, great striking like we've seen from him time and time again, and just dominates a number 2 in the division prospect in Brady. Just showed that he can beat the best in that division. He's now won all 7 of his UFC fights and jumped up 5 spots in the rankings after that one. Now he's number 3 and in a very good spot to get the title shot if we don't get some of the other guys in the mix here with Bilal Muhammad and IMG this weekend. Also at welterweight, another fight that could help a guy stake his name in the top of this division and in title contention. You had number 4, Leon Edwards, the former champion, going against number 9, Carlos Praches. Edwards, a 34-year-old, grew up in England, former welterweight champion. He was on a 2-fight losing streak to Bilal Muhammad and Sean Brady coming into this one. Hadn't looked the same in a couple fights. Going against Praches, a 32-year-old from Brazil, who was 12-1 in the last 6 years and 5-1 in the UFC. All those by KO TKO as far as the wins go. So we were rolling with Praches. Minus 210 wasn't the best line, but again, something you could throw in the mix with a parlay. We thought him having that extra reach and a BJJ black belt was going to be able to keep it on the feet and do that striking like he loves to do, finish people off. Well, we had him by KO TKO plus 165, and he finishes by KO TKO over Edwards, even though Edwards had never been finished before, never been stopped that way. He gets a second round KO 1 minute and 28 seconds into the round. The first round was actually good for Edwards. He won the round on all the judges' scorecards. He was fighting smart. He got some takedowns versus Praches. Started with standing body lock from the back. Late in the round, where he's throwing some punches from behind, catching Praches, just annoying him. Not really doing much damage, but scoring, annoying his opponent, keeping him from doing what he wanted to do. Can't hit the guy if he's behind you, right? Then we get to round 2. Minute and 25 seconds in, Praches lands a straight right that's so hard, pretty much lifts Edwards off his feet. Go watch the slow-mo replays. The guy gets lifted off his feet, falls flat on his back, eyes roll back like he sent him to the shadow realm. And that's it. Praches does jump on and land another huge left from his feet before the ref jumps in, but that's just because he was so quick. Once he landed that straight right that dropped Edwards, the fight was over from there. He could have just walked around the ring for another 10 seconds, and Edwards still wasn't getting back up to try to fight. That was a nasty punch. And now he jumps up 4 spots in the rankings to number 5 with the win, getting himself in the title mix as well. Now, there's plenty of people calling for Praches and Morales to fight each other to see who gets the next title shot, or fight each other because, the winner of this weekend's fight might be the one to get the title shot. To see who gets the next up on deck position kind of spot for the title. I don't know if the UFC would want to do that. These guys are both stars in the making. These guys have shown how dangerous they are. They get finishes, which the UFC loves and the fans love. So would you really want to knock one of them back another year or two and not have them in the title mix by losing to that one? I don't think they would. I think if you get a spectacular finish from either Muhammad or IMG in this fight, one of those guys gets the title, and then you put Praches and Morales either on the shelf or put them against somebody else to get another win. And then you could put Morales, if he gets the win, up against the victor of the next fight and save Praches for one after that. If you put them up against each other, you get one guy in the mix, one guy with a title shot. if you kind of save them and fight them against other people, you still keep 2. I think the UFC is going to do it that way. And of course, all it depends on who wins between IMG and Bilal Muhammad. If it's a great, impressive performance by one of them, they get the title shot. If it's a situation where it's a boring unanimous decision or majority decision or even split decision, then you jump Morales over them and let one of those guys fight Prochas. But still, a lot of things you can do in this welterweight division with some of the stars that were made last weekend at the Garden. Then at lightweight, to start off the main card, you had number 9, Beneil Dariush versus Benoit Saint-Denis. Dariush, 36-year-old, born in Iran, grew up in California, against Saint-Denis, the 29-year-old from France, the former military officer. Both these guys have been, pretty similar, kind of in the same kind of mix right now in that division, where they had some struggles over the last couple of years, trying to find their way back. I didn't feel confident in picking either one of these guys to win, and I'm glad, because I don't know if I would have picked the right way. Because I picked the over 1.5 rounds. I thought this would have gone deeper. I thought maybe it goes a distance of plus 205. Wouldn't even get out of the first minute of this fight, because Saint-Denis gets a first-round KO 16 seconds in. That's right, 16 seconds into this fight. He drops Beneil Dariush. They're mixing up early right away. Saint-Denis looked like he was going for a takedown, was too far away, and Dariush pushes him away, even goes for a big knee. But as Saint-Denis is getting back up, he's swinging. He's protecting himself by fighting off his opponent, swinging those punches, and eventually he lands some short uppercuts and a big left hook that drops Dariush to the mat. Drops him on his face. Saint-Denis lands on him, starts to throw some more punches, but Herb Dean jumps in right away and stops it. Now, Dariush didn't look happy with the stoppage, but, the guy was on his face, arms splayed out, could not protect himself. He might not have been unconscious. He might have been awake still, but there was no way that he was protecting himself in that position, and he was just getting opened up to some beatdowns by Saint-Denis if they let that continue. So I think it was a good stoppage by Herb Dean. I can understand Dariush not being okay with it, but the rest of us who saw that, no, it was a good stoppage by one of the best refs in MMA. Now, Saint-Denis jumped 5 spots to number 8 in the rankings with that win. And I heard him talking to Ariel Helwani later after the fight, beginning this week, where he was talking about how he's finally got himself in the right place, how he didn't do the right things when he was going through that losing streak. The one fight didn't even really come in with coaches, that he wasn't training the right way, didn't have the right team. And now he is getting himself back in the mix in this messy division by getting good coaches, by doing the right thing, training the right way, and making himself a name again in this lightweight division. Then in the prelims, we touched on a couple fights as well. We gave you some picks for the middleweight battle between Bo Nickel and Rodolfo Vieira. Nickel, the former Penn State wrestler, going against Vieira, the Brazilian, who was 6-3 in the UFC and had a lot of wins by submission. It was a wrestler versus a grappler. Who was going to win? We rolled with Nickel. I thought that the wrestling would be good enough to stop Vieira's attempts at maybe getting the submission, kind of neutralize him. Maybe it goes a distance. I like the over 2.5 rounds. Just missed that one. I said even maybe to go the distance at minus 126. Don't come close on that one, because Bo Nickel gets the 3rd round KO head kick at 2 minutes and 24 seconds into the round. That's right. Just 7 seconds before we would have hit the over 2.5. But, this was a great fight for Nickel. This was an incredible bounce back fight. Forget any possible fraud check you might have gotten the last one from people talking. This one showed that he is still a legit badass, and he'll be back on main card soon enough, because he looks great throughout the fight, mixing up his strikes and his takedowns. He used a good stiff jab throughout those 3 rounds to keep Vieira at bay, snap his head back a little bit, and just do some damage, open his opponent up. He was bleeding from deep into that first round all the way through. He almost tripled up Vieira in the striking, honestly, and stuffed his takedowns. All 6 down attempts by Vieira, no good. Nickel, up 2 rounds going into that 3rd round. One judge even had it 10-8 for Nickel in that 2nd round. So all he did was cruise to victory. Didn't. Decided to show us something we haven't seen from him before, and that's a head kick. In the 3rd round, he drops him cold with the left leg to the head. Vieira has no idea it was coming, because obviously we haven't seen that from Bo Nickel before. And Nickel didn't even try to hit him again. Kicked him, dropped him, and just walked around the cage. Knew he got the win. So impressive performance by Bo Nickel to reaffirm himself as one of the up-and-comers in this division. And, of course, another one's going to factor into this title picture we talked about earlier, of course, on the card, and we talked about earlier in the show, was the women's flyweight battle between number 4, Erin Blanchfield, and number 8, Tracy Cortez. This was a rematch from these two fighting 6.5 years ago in Invicta. Now, both these women, of course, aged and growing up better in their careers. Cortez, a 31-year-old from Arizona, 6-1 in the UFC, going against Blanchfield, who's also 6-1 in the UFC, but she's 26 now, so she wasn't even 20 when she was making that fight against Cortez in Invicta. We thought that at this point in her career, she's a much better fighter than them probably, and would do better in this fight and get the revenge win here, and we were not wrong. So Blanchfield gets the revenge win in this one. She was the favorite at minus 245. We liked her in that, put her in as part of that parlay with the money lines of all the fights. We'll touch on that in a second, but we also liked her to go the distance probably. We liked her by points at minus 130 when that came out. That unfortunately does not happen. We said maybe the fight in general goes to points or ends by decision, goes the distance. Those were not pretty when they came out. They were minus 380, so not worth touching at all. But Blanchfield gets the win by second round, rear naked choke submission, 4 minutes and 44 seconds into the round. The first round turned into mostly a striking battle. Blanchfield didn't really try any takedowns. Cortez kind of just stood in the middle of the cage there, in the middle of the mat, and just circled along with Blanchfield as she was going on the outside, kind of bouncing in and out, trying to get her strikes off, trying to get in there, land some punches. I thought that Blanchfield did a good job moving, landed some good shots, but Cortez's punches were the bigger ones in that round, and she got the win on all three judges' scorecards for the first round. Then they go to the second round. It's actually Cortez who initiates the first takedown. She goes right in there early in the round, tries to get Blanchfield on the mat, gets her down, but Blanchfield rolls right away as Cortez tries to take the back, gets it into the guard position on top. Eventually they get back to the feet, and then with 2 minutes left in the round, Blanchfield gets her first takedown. About a minute later, they get back up, but again, about 30 seconds left. Blanchfield gets a takedown again against Cortez, and then throws on the rear naked choke, kind of from the side. It was an awkward position. Really didn't have the back, couldn't really lock it in well, but she got it around her neck enough that as Cortez tries to escape, she pulls her back down, kind of by the neck on top of her. Blanchfield on her back on the mat, Cortez on top of her, gets the arm under the neck, and Cortez taps for the rear naked choke submission to get Blanchfield another good win here in the UFC. 7-1 now. She gets her revenge on Cortez and keeps her ranking there at number 4. Probably puts herself in the on-deck circle for this title shot, as I talked about earlier. Silva should be the next one in line for Shevchenko if she defends that 125-pound title, but you still got Blanchfield sitting right there with a chance for the title shot. And you know what? If Shevchenko decides to move up to fight either a Harrison or a Nunez, whenever that happens, the UFC would make her give up that belt as long as they follow what they've done with everybody else, which would mean it would be open, and then you could have a Silva versus Blanchfield title shot like you just did at 115 with Dern and Jandiroba. But if that doesn't happen, there's probably Silva up next for Shevchenko and Blanchfield right there waiting on deck, or maybe getting one more fight against another opponent to further her case. Now, you followed as we went along, all 6 of those fights. We nailed that money line winner. Now, of course, the odds weren't great, so if you're going to bet them straight up, that's going to be ugly. You're not going to do that. But you put it in a parlay like I did, you got some good payback on that one. So hopefully you joined in on that, and you got a good money line parlay. As far as the other bets, so we put the prop bets, didn't do so great in those. 3 and 5. We hit some good numbers, though. Shevchenko by points was plus money. We hit that. Morales by KO TKO, that was plus 320. So that was a big hit if you put some money on that. Proches by KO TKO also was some nice payback. But then the other ones like Magachev by KO TKO or submission and the under 3.5 rounds in that one, those don't hit. Dariush St. Denis over the 1.5 rounds. Doesn't even get out of a minute. Nickel Vieira to go the distance or over the 2.5 rounds. The 2.5 rounds just missed, but neither of those hit. And then Blanchfield by points also was a big dud. But if you put those money line picks together, that paid for itself and then some. So good night overall if you did that. Unfortunately, couldn't hit some of those other ones, but I think you still ended up either breaking even or doing great depending on how you bet things with us. And before we move on from that card, there was a great story coming out of that one. It's just a really cool thing. You got Ethan Ewing, if you hadn't heard, making his debut for the UFC. Now, he won a title in Uriah Faber's promotion the Friday before UFC 322. And then less than a week later, on the Thursday morning, actually gets woken up by people blowing up his phone because the UFC is trying to get a hold of him as a last-minute replacement. So, of course, weigh-ins are Friday, fights Saturday. He just gets up right away, throws on, the heavy clothes, goes to the gym, starts sweating it out, trying to cut weight, catches a red eye from California to New York, gets in a little extra weight cutting, a little extra work, but not much because that traffic from, the airports in New York to the Garden, to the middle of Manhattan, if you haven't done it, it's brutal. It could take about 2 hours, even though it's, a matter of probably 10, 15 miles. So he eventually gets to Midtown Manhattan, does a little more sweating, manages to make weight somehow. The night before the fight, he's hanging out in Times Square, just taking it all in. No one knows who the heck he is. The next night, he's in the Mecca, the center of it all, getting his first win in the UFC against Wellmaker, a guy who was a tough up-and-comer who a lot of people thought was going to walk through Ewing on short notice. Well, Ewing gets the unanimous decision win, even gets 30-27 on one card. So in 8 days, the guy goes from winning a title in Uriah Faber's promotion to getting his first UFC win on 48 hours notice. An impressive performance by Ethan Ewing. Looking forward to seeing what's next for him in the UFC. And of course, the biggest brawl at UFC 322 didn't even involve the cage, as it was out in the stands amongst the fans. Dylan Dennis getting his ass kicked by Makhachev's crew. Now, I don't think it was exactly a fair fight. It was basically 10-on-4 with all of the guys from Team Khabib, Team Makhachev there in those front rows, getting involved against Dennis and some of his crew. And Dennis allegedly, wasn't really doing anything to maybe make that happen to, start things up. But, I mean, this is a guy who's been talking trash for years and saying things that you really shouldn't say unless you're going to back it up against, Makhachev, Khabib, everybody in that crew. Some of the nasty things that have come out of his mouth when he was training with McGregor and has just kept at it over the years. That was not a good scene for him because he walked right into the lion's den with all those guys there backing up Makhachev and just got his ass beat. And does he say in the first Top Gun movie, son, your mouth's writing checks your body can't cash. And that's what happened with Dylan Nance right now. He showed up to that event and just got beat down and jumped by those guys. Of course, Dana White said he blamed himself afterwards because he heard that Dennis was out there, knew that he was kind of moving around the crowd, not just staying in his seats, and said, well, you know what? If you bought a ticket, let him sit there. I mean, he even knew, apparently, that people told him Jorge Masvidal was there and wanted to beat the crap out of Dylan Dennis. So it wasn't even these guys were the only ones that were looking for him. I'm sure there was a lot more than just those two crews, too, that really wanted to throw a beat down on this guy for the things he has spouted out at them on social media and in interviews. He got his payback, but now he also gets banned from all UFC events in the future. Might have been more on Makhachev's crew as far as starting things that day, but of course they're all involved with the UFC, so they're not going to kick them out. Dylan Dennis isn't, never will be, and now can't even show up to events because, one, he gets jumped, and two, they just don't want him around. Now, the UFC wasn't the only one with some great finishes last weekend. The BKFC was in action as well. Out there in the desert in California, you had BKFC 84 Dyer versus Hunt 2. It was a hell of a card. There were only 2 fights that got past the 3rd round and only 1 fight that made it to the judges' scorecards. Lots of finishes throughout the night for the BKFC, and one of those was the great comeback win by the juggernaut for the light heavyweight title, Lorenzo Hunt, going against Josh Dyer, who was the champion. Now, this was originally announced at BKFC 82 as Dyer versus Mundell, that the Redneck Mundell was going to move up, fight for this title, try to be a 2-division champ. All of a sudden that gets changed and we get Hunt back in there, who beat Dyer in 2021 by 5th round TKO. Doesn't take that long this time. The 43-year-old Hunt coming off, of course, his loss to Mick Terrell when he fought for the heavyweight title, trying to get 3 belts. He had the injury to the arm, had suspension, came back against Dyer from South Dakota, the 34-year-old who was the current champion after beating Mike Richmond. We thought Dyer might get the TKO in the 4th round. We get Hunt with the 1st round KO. 1 minute and 59 seconds into the round. That's right, 1 second before it was over. This fight is called because both guys start a little bit cautious, obviously knowing each other's power. But then Dyer starts in first, jumps in there, lands a good combo. Finishes with a big right that drops the juggernaut about 14 seconds into the fight. Then about 30 seconds later, Dyer lands another combo that ends with a right that stumbles Hunt. And he goes down on his hands and knees across the mat. So now it's 2 knockdowns for Dyer in the first minute of this fight. It looks like he is clearly in control, and the juggernaut just isn't himself. There's even another point where Hunt goes stumbling across the ring again after a mix-up, maybe a little bit of trip of the feet, but he gets saved from falling to the mat again because he bumps into the ref and regains his footing. So it looks like Dyer is in complete control of this. It looks like this is his fight to win. It's just a matter of time, and the juggernaut is going to go down in his first foray back into the BKFC. But that's not the case. You can't kill the juggernaut. And with about 15 seconds left as Dyer is stalking, he throws a shot. Hunt ducks down, throws a big overhand right that drops Dyer and puts him out cold. No chance of him getting back up. No chance of this fight continuing. It's really the one punch that Hunt really landed throughout the fight. He threw some others and maybe glanced. This was the first clean flush shot that he landed on Dyer, and it puts him out cold. And he regains this title. And you know what the crazy thing is? It's almost exact replay of what happened in timing-wise. to when he knocked out Richmond in comeback. Now, Dyer had more knockdowns than Richmond did in that fight, and Richmond got that first knockdown a lot later in the first round against Hunt. But Hunt gets up after getting knocked down, and with about just under 15 seconds left, right around that 12 seconds mark, he throws a big punch that just drops his opponent, knocks him out cold. Crazy how things come full circle. And now Hunt, once again, is the champion of the light heavyweight division. Afterwards, he called out Mike Perry, both in the ring and in the post-fight press conference, saying, as he likes to, there is no champ unless I say so. He says he is the real king of violence, and that if Mike Perry wants to keep that title, he has to fight him. I don't think that's happening. He's too big for Mike Perry. I mean, this fight's 185. Perry's fighting at like 170, 165, and a bunch of his fights been against guys who are like 155, 145 pound fighters for most of their careers. So I don't think he's going to go up 20 pounds or even 15 pounds to fight the juggernaut. I think he's going to stay down and try to cherry pick somebody else if we don't finally get that Mundell fight at 175. I mean, Mundell was supposed to fight on this one. If he got pulled, hopefully it's to fight Mike Perry and finally get them to battle for that belt, because otherwise there's just no one that makes sense in that division. Speaking of the middleweight division, the co-main event of this one was Drew Stuvie versus Zeb Vincent. Stuvie coming in on short notice. Wild boy, fighting for the first time outside of Canada, was just on 1 week's notice that he came into this fight. Actually called his coach back from vacation. Guy left vacation early to come back and be there for Stuvie. And, he came in there, made weight, got in there against the CWB, Zeb Vincent from Missouri, and got the win. We thought that Stuvie would get the second round TKO, that if it was a quick fight, that's Stuvie. If it goes long, that's where Vincent wants to have it happen. But Stuvie gets a unanimous decision win. 49-46 on 2 judges' scorecards, 48-47 on 1 judge's scorecards. And if you follow Zeb Vincent and his corner, they thought those were all wrong. But I don't know what the heck they were watching, because Vincent was coming forward, trying to push the action throughout the fight, but especially in that first round, but Stuvie was landing the bigger shots, and he stumbled Vincent in that first round. Thought he won that one. Second, third, fourth, a lot of the same thing, where Vincent's coming forward, landing some good shots, but Stuvie's landing the bigger shots. And in just about all those rounds, there were times where Vincent's stumbling and almost goes down and somehow manages to stay on his feet. So credit to him for never going to the mat, but almost going down about 4 different times in those first 4 rounds. I think those are all for Stuvie. Now, in the 5th round, Stuvie starts by picking Vincent apart from range, like he wants to do. Vincent eventually gets into the clinch, gets some good punches there, gets some good combos, maybe steals that round late, and that's where you can get it 49-46, or maybe if you gave it to Vincent in the first round because he had more volume while Stuvie had more power, then that's where you get the 49-46 they had on 2 judges' scorecards. I'm okay with that. 48-47, I don't agree with that. I don't know where the hell they were finding that, but more importantly, after the 4th round, you got Zeb Vincent's corner telling him it's an even fight, that it's all up to the 5th round. What were they watching? This guy was almost on the mat multiple times in those first 4 rounds. That was clearly Stuvie up in that fight, and his corner was telling him that. Once again, please give us open scoring, because sometimes these guys just don't know what the hell they're watching, even if they're in the corners. So apparently, they thought they were even. Vincent wasn't happy with the decision, but I thought clearly Stuvie won this fight and was dominating throughout, because every time Vincent came forward, he got knocked back with some big punches that almost put him to the mat. Credit to him for not falling, but he definitely was not in charge of that fight, even though he was coming forward. Now, Stuvie gets himself in the top 5 of that division. I just mentioned how there really isn't another contender for Mundell. It's either Stuvie at number 5, who's still unbeaten now at 4-0, or Mike Perry, who's in those rankings, but doesn't seem to ever want to fight for that title. If Mike Perry's not going to step up and fight for that belt and fight for a real belt, not just the King of Violence, but fight for that actual championship, like Conor McGregor wanted to, like most of the fans wanted to, then let's get Stuvie in there. Let's get the Canadian a shot against the Redneck Mundell. And he was asked about that after the fight, said if he has a full camp to train and prepare for the Redneck, he will give him problems. So I'm all for that if Mike Perry doesn't want to chase the title. Also on that card, you had a big debut with Aspen Ladd coming over from MMA for the first time. The 30-year-old from Cali fighting Ciano Bintliff. Bintliff had been 1-0 in the BKFC after getting a big win in Sturgis earlier in the summer. We thought that Ladd might get the win, although it's going to be whose experience was more important, because she had a lot of more experience outside the BKFC. Bintliff was the only one who had experience inside the BKFC, which can be big sometimes. And it doesn't matter what Bintliff did in the BKFC early on, because Ladd gets the win. First round, KO. Another late one just before the end of the round. And she just dominated this fight from the beginning. Aggressive right away. right from scratch, comes in there, starts throwing a Benn-Lift. She doesn't care what Benn-Lift was throwing, doesn't care if it landed on her. She was just walking right through her punches. About 20 seconds in, Ladd gets Benn-Lift in the half clinch with the left hand over the top and throws some uppercuts with the right, drops her for the first time. She gets back up. Ladd continues to come forward, later catches Benn-Lift with a nasty left hook that lands right behind the ear, puts her on her butt. She's bleeding. She looks like she's out of sorts a little bit. Still manages to get back up and continue fighting. But just before the end of the round, again, Ladd gets her in that half clinch, starts opening up with the right hand. Benn-Lift goes down. She looks like she's going to get back up, but first gets to the knee, but cannot get any further from there. Cannot answer the count. Cannot get saved by the bell because it was at the end of the round, but you don't get saved by the bell. Now we get the victory for Aspen Ladd in her first BKFC fight. Now, of course, the Misfit Faria is always up for a new challenge. She was there ringside yelling with that Queen of Violence belt at Aspen Ladd, saying she wasn't impressed, she doesn't care, she's going to drop her. When asked about it in the post-fight, Aspen Ladd said that she pretty much have to cut off one of her legs to get down to 125, so she can't go fight Faria at that belt that she holds, but if she wants to fight in between, she want to meet her halfway at 135, or fight Borga at 145, she'll do either of those. She's game that she's there to fight the baddest bitches. So we'll see what is next for Aspen Ladd. Only one win, but of course, big name, big pedigree, sometimes that jumps you to the front of the line, especially when a lot of these women have just been steamrolled by the champions before. You also had a good battle at light heavyweight with Cody Vidal versus David Simpson. It was back and forth. Vidal wins by 5th round KO. This was important for both guys to really make a name for themselves and hang around things. Simpson falls to further under 500, so that could be a problem for him, but Vidal had a great comeback. He gets put to the mat during this fight. Both these guys end up going to the mat. It is back and forth throughout the 5 rounds. At the end of the 4th round, it looks like these guys are barely able to hang on. They both look like they are absolutely shot. But then 30 seconds into that final stanza, Vidal throws a looping right hand that drops Simpson, and he can't get back up before the count. Fight over. Vidal wins. Afterwards, Dave Feldman just rewarding both these guys, says he's going to double Vidal's fight purse and give both these guys a bonus. So he loved the performance they put on, and sometimes if you impress the boss, it works out well for you in big ways, and that's what's going to happen for Vidal after this win that he comes back and gets over Simpson. Going to get double his purse plus a bonus. All right, there was some big news in boxing we have to talk about this week, and that was a new opponent, a new fight for Jake Paul. Now, some people are saying this is going to be a new opponent, new fight, and new end of his career because of who he picked to go against. Jake Paul, of course, is supposed to fight Tank Davis in November. It was going to be a joke of a fight, an exhibition fight against current champion in boxing, but a guy he was going to outweigh and outsize by just ridiculous amounts to the point that they had to move it out of Georgia to Miami because Georgia was not going to sanction it. Of course, that gets all wiped out when there's new allegations against Tank Davis for more domestic violence than what we'd previously known of before. And he tried to keep it together, as we talked about, tried to fight more people to step in there, try to get Francis Ngannou or Nate Diaz or Tommy Fury or some of these other guys to step up on 2 weeks' notice and fight him. Didn't work out, and Netflix said, you know what, we're not going to keep this going. Let's try another time. So they do that. They bump it back. He wanted to fight in December, and he did that. So now Jake Paul will be fighting December 19th in Miami on Netflix against Anthony Joshua. That's right. Former heavyweight champion Anthony Joshua is going to be fight Jake Paul in a real pro fight. It's going to go on their records. There's going to be 10-ounce gloves, 8-ounce rounds of 3 minutes. Wow. This is probably going to be the first time, besides that Tyson fight, but, I mean, that guy was 57 years old and had just had a major medical emergency before he fought Jake Paul by a couple months. So for the first time since that Tyson fight, Jake Paul is going to fight somebody who's actually bigger than him and a legit boxer. Because Mike Tyson's one of the greatest ever, if not the greatest ever. But the guy was 57. Now, he's going to be fighting Anthony Joshua. He's going to have a weight limit of 245 pounds. But this is going to be a big difference. Usually Jake Paul is bigger than the guys he fights. Usually they're like 170, 185 pounders, and he's 205, 210, whatever he's weighing when he's walking around. And a lot of them haven't been true boxers. A lot of them were MMA fighters that weren't even really strikers. Some of them were his weight class, kind of were his size, were his boxers when he fought Tommy Fury, where he lost that fight. but a lot of them have been more spectacle, more show, more circus than real boxing events. Now he's fighting a true, real boxer still in the major part of his career. I'm not going to say prime per se, but Anthony Joshua was one of the best heavyweights of the 2010s. The guy beat a living legend when he took the belts from Klitschko in 2017. We never got the matchups against Deontay Wilder or Tyson Fury. But eventually he did fight another legit heavyweight title holder in Usyk. Lost back-to-back fights to him, but that's nothing to shake a stick at. Everybody loses to Usyk. Now, yes, he's probably past his prime at 36. And he's coming off a KO loss to Daniel Dubois last September. But he is still leagues above Jake Paul as far as a boxer. And he is still much bigger, much stronger, with a lot more power. Paul's strong. He has power. We've seen that. This guy is a lot stronger with a lot more power. So for the first time ever, I will say, great job, Jake Paul, and picking an opponent and stepping up in your boxing career. Now, I've given credit to this guy in his business. Obviously, the guy knows what he's doing. He's made himself tons of money doing what he's done. I've even given him credit for trying to bring up other fighters and do the right thing by them, trying to help MMA fighters get better pay and better salary and, get in a better situation than they've been forever with the UFC and other organizations. He's done things to try to help women's fighters and try to support other fighters and bring them up with him. It isn't all about just him. He's supported fighting and fighters in general. And I've given him credit for that end and for the business end of it. But I've never really given him a lot of credit for his boxing career because, as I said, it's been a lot of smaller guys. It's been a lot of non-strikers. There's been a lot of guys way past their prime. This is the first time he has taken on a huge challenge in his boxing career that I just have to stand back and say, wow, you got balls, good on you. Because Joshua's going to be a lot bigger than him, even with that 245-pound limit. He's going to be bigger. He's going to be stronger. Most people think Joshua's going to destroy him in the first 4 rounds. A lot of people say 2 rounds. Some people have even said in the first round he will drop him and knock him out. He is a minus 1,200 favorite, Anthony Joshua, over Jake Paul right now. I mean, most people even say that if he doesn't wipe the floor with him, then the fight's fixed. That's ridiculous because he should just destroy this guy. And let's not forget 28 wins by Anthony Joshua. 25 of those have come by KO. And one of those was Francis Ngannou, who took a lot bigger shots with smaller gloves in the UFC than Jake Paul has taken from the guys he has fought. And Ngannou had a great chin, was never beaten up by guys, went the distance with Tyson Fury, and got dropped, knocked out, clock cleaned in the second round by Anthony Joshua. So if he takes this fight as seriously as he took Ngannou, Anthony Joshua should absolutely destroy Jake Paul. And you'll get a lot of people tuning in for that. You'll get some people tuning in because they love Jake Paul and love what he does. They'll get plenty of people, especially boxing fans, who hate the circus he has brought to the sport and what it has become and want to see him get his clock clean, want to see that mat full of his blood. And you might get that chance. We'll see. But credit to him for taking this chance, for making this fight and taking this step up in his career to try to prove that he is a legit boxer. Because if he somehow even just survives Anthony Joshua, he's going to get a lot more credit. If he, by miracle, beats him, then this guy is going to change around the trajectory of his boxing career in a second. So credit to him for making this fight, for taking this challenge, and for taking this risk, really. Because as we said, Anthony Joshua, even at 36, even past his prime, is a bad, bad man who's going to be bigger, stronger, and probably be out for blood. So good on him for taking this chance, and if he somehow survives it, kudos to you, Jake Paul. And hopefully they can bring around the rest of those fighters that were on that undercard. Hopefully we get to see, Weidman Silva battling in boxing, or some of those other fights we're going to see in the November card that got canceled and got screwed over because of Tank Davis's outside the ring activities. Hopefully they can do that. I'm sure he's trying because he's done a great job with that before. But now he's doing a great job and actually stepping up to the challenge and picking a legit opponent, someone who could really hurt him, someone who could possibly even end his career. Credit to him for taking this fight. Now, just to finish up before we get out of here, we got some other boxing and MMA news that we got to get in here quick before we wrap things up here on this episode of Fighting Lions with Brian Ciano. Now, of course, we had a big fight last weekend. You had the rematch between Benn-Eubank Jr. Of course, this was a rematch of their father's rematch because their fathers fought twice back in the 90s. And then these two fought 7 months ago when they matched up, and Eubank got the unanimous decision win 116, 112 on all three judges' scorecards. This was much more one sided and goes the other way as Ben gets the unanimous decision victory 119, 107, 116, 110, 118, 108. Honestly, I don't know what the hell that one judge was watching. 116, 110. Seriously? He somehow gave 4 rounds to Eubank Jr. and 3 in a row between 6 and 8. No way in hell were we watching the same fight. Because although Eubank Jr. at 36 was 7 years older than his opponent and looked bigger, he looked about a head taller than his opponent and another weight class or two bigger. He got dominated throughout this fight. He spent a lot of the time on the fight against the ropes or in the corner, with Ben just backing him up and throwing shots here and there, trying to pick him apart, getting some good shots in there. Now, eventually, he kind of came alive a little bit in the 7th and 8th round, probably took the 8th round there, came alive again late in the fight because obviously he was down big at that point and really knew that he needed to get things going and mix things up. But for most of the fight, he was backing up against the ropes or in the corner and taking shots from Ben or just trying to avoid them. And then you get into the last minute of the fight, he gets dropped twice in the last minute to give a 10-7 round to Ben at the end there. It was just complete domination for that one. And I don't know what was going on with Eubank, whether he was too gassed trying to get back down to that weight twice in a year or what. But now Ben gets the second of that. It is split 1-1, although won't get a third one according to Ben. He says that this ends here, that this battle of the bloodlines is over, and that he is done fighting Eubank Jr., and they both have other things going on with family and their careers. You also have a situation now where Wardley is no longer the interim champ at heavyweight. That's because he is now the full champion in the WBO. Of course, Wardley won the interim title over Joseph Parker a few weeks ago in the UK after that controversial stoppage. But he might have been given that interim title anyway, because we found out later on that Joseph Parker tested positive for a banned substance the day of the fight. He came out right afterwards and said that, he's never taken any banned substances, doesn't believe in PEDs, that he's all against it and he's going to be vindicated. Well, it was later revealed that it wasn't a PED or something that was going to help him. Apparently, he tested positive for cocaine. Now, he, of course, again, said he was going to be cleared in any investigation. We'll see if that happens, but that's going to be big if he's not, because it'll be a 2-year ban if he is not vindicated in the investigation of this positive test. So Wardley ends up with that interim title and now was going to get a shot probably against Usyk because he held that title, was given a little bit of a dispensation and allowed to hold off on defending it before he was stripped because whether it was injuries or other reasons, whatever, the WBO gave him some more time. Well, he decided that time wasn't long enough because he informed the WBO that he is relinquishing the title instead of facing Wardley to unite those belts. So now, through an email, Wardley becomes the full world champion at heavyweight for the WBO. Now, Wardley, for his part, says he doesn't know why Usyk is giving up his belt. Who knows? He's flirted with bare knuckle boxing promotions and talked about fighting Jake Paul in boxing and MMA, or who knows? Maybe he just got tired of the WBO trying to push him to fight one of these guys and want to pick a different opponent. I don't know. But for whatever reason, Usyk has relinquished those titles, and now Wardley is the full WBO heavyweight champion. Also, you had the PFL come out with some news this week where they announced the beginning of their schedule for the 2026 year and their first main event as well. New CEO John Martin has been going around doing interviews over the last couple months since he took the job, talking about changing PFL and some of the things that they did. Of course, this year they changed from their regular season and playoff format that they had to just straight single elimination tournaments. Did those? Well, he said those are gone too. Now it's just going to go straight matchmaking like other MMA organizations. No more tournaments, no more multiple champions, one belt per division, except for maybe some special circumstances like when they had those super fights that you had, for instance, Nagano win a title that now isn't the heavyweight champion because that's up for grabs in December for the PFL. But now there will be one belt for the division for the most part. No more tournaments, no regular season, playoffs, all that. Just regular fights for the PFL. And they're going to have 24 events planned through 2026. 16 global events and 8 regional events in its MENA and Africa series. So I guess no PFL Europe next year. No Oceania over in Australia and New Zealand they were supposed to start. I don't know. We'll see if those things pop back up later on. But right now, we're there at 2026. 24 events scheduled, 8 in MENA and Africa, 16 around the rest of the world. And their first event will be February 7th in Dubai at the Coca-Cola Arena, where they've had a bunch of events before with a familiar face. Usman Nurmagomedov is going to be defending his lightweight title once again against the Axeman, Alfie Davis. So that's the fight that he called for. That's the man he shouted out after he beat Paul Hughes for the second time in a contested, controversial fight over there in that same arena. Now he's going to take on Alfie Davis. We'll see if he has better luck, the Englishman, than the Irishman did against Usman Nurmagomedov in the Coca-Cola Arena in Dubai. They're also going to have other events throughout the first couple months of the calendar in 2026 planned out. In March, you're going to have 2 events already planned out. First in Madrid, which is going to be their first time in Spain, and then in Pittsburgh. So big change there from Madrid to the Steel City. And then in April, they're going to have a fight event in Chicago. So a bunch of events already planned for the PFL next year in 2026. Thanks so much for joining me this week on Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. So much to talk about. Hopefully you stuck with me as we got it all in there. We'll get back to you next week where we'll have an all-new show, hopefully, on the Thanksgiving weekend. We'll get something out maybe for you Black Friday or Saturday, depending on how things go. We're going to have a UFC Fight Night review from this fight card over there in the Middle East. We'll recap the big DAZN pay-per-view card in Saudi Arabia as well with Benavidez Yardy, Norman Haney, and touch on some of the other fights on that card as well. We'll start looking ahead to some of the fights at the start of December, maybe get some people involved in talking about those fights. We have PFL, UFC, and boxing, all that going on, as well as BKFC. Big card for them the beginning of December as well. So all that starting on next week's show. Make sure you follow us on X at Fighting Lines, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok at Fighting Lines Pod. Whether you're following me on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify, give the podcast some likes, some subscriptions, some comments. Do whatever you can to get it out there and let people know that we are talking fighting with you here on Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you next week on the show.